Gentle humor was the lifeblood of playwright Neil Simon. File in this September 22, 1994. File photo. American playwright Neil Simon answers questions during an interview in Seattle, Washington. Simon, a master of comedy whose laugh-filled hits such as The Odd Couple, Barefoot in the Park, and his Brighton Beach trilogy dominated Broadway for decades, died on Sunday, August 26, 2018. He was 91. AP photo. Gary Stewart. File. New York. AP. When master playwright Neil Simon accepted the Mark Twain Prize for American Humor in 2006, he was visibly nervous. But his gentle humor was evident. "It took me 6 years to write my first play," he said, recalling that he found the title for "Come Blow Your Horn" from one of his daughter's nursery rhyme books. He said it turned out to be a so-so play that was turned into a so-so movie with Frank Sinatra. But it was successful enough that Simon considered calling his subsequent works "The Sheep's in the Meadow" and "The Cow's in the Corn." For the first time, he said, "I had money in the bank. Yes, sir, 3 bags full." Simon, who died Sunday at 91, was a meticulous joke-smith, peppering his plays, especially the early ones, with one-liners and humorous situations that critics said sometimes came at the expense of character and believability. No matter. For much of his career, audiences embraced his work, which often focused on middle-class, urban life, many of the plots drawn from his own personal experience. His characters battled depression, alcoholism and loneliness. Simon's stage successes included The Odd Couple, Barefoot in the Park, the Brighton Beach trilogy, The Prisoner of 2nd Avenue, Last of the Red Hot Lovers, The Sunshine Boys, Plaza Suite, Chapter 2, Sweet Charity, and Promises. Many of his plays were adapted into movies, and one, The Odd Couple, even became a popular television series. For 7 months in 1967, he had 4 productions running at the same time on Broadway: Barefoot in the Park, The Odd Couple, Sweet Charity, and The Star-Spangled Girl. Simon's ability to recognize life's little annoyances, too many pillows piled on a sofa, being told as a kid you may not eat any more cookies, connected with audiences. A scene in The Odd Couple, when Felix Unger passive-aggressively leaves a note on Oscar's pillow, "We're all out of cornflakes. F you," got huge laughs. The loss of Simon was especially hard for playwrights and screenwriters. Brandy Mayhem Singer, who co-penned the film, Mrs. Doubtfire, mourned Simon as a truly great American storyteller. "If you write comedy, if you write period, you learn something from Neil Simon," Singer said. Christopher Diaz, a Pulitzer Prize finalist, took to Twitter to remember an icon. "In a different life, I would have loved to have been my generation's Neil Simon. I'm sad that we don't have that kind of voice." And Big Bang Theory creator Bill Prady wrote that, "There is no American comedy writer whose work isn't influenced by the rhythm and music of Neil Simon's words." Simon was the recipient of 4 Tony Awards, the Pulitzer Prize, the Kennedy Center Honors, 1995, and, in 1983, he even had a Broadway theater named after him when the Alvin was rechristened the Neil Simon Theater. The bespectacled, mild-looking Simon, described in a New York Times Magazine profile as looking like an accountant or librarian who dressed just this side of drab, was a relentless writer and rewriter. "I am most alive and most fulfilled sitting alone in a room, hoping that those words forming on the paper in the Smith Corona will be the first perfect play ever written in a single draft," Simon wrote in the introduction to one of the many anthologies of his plays. Simon's own life figured most prominently in what became known as his Brighton Beach trilogy, Brighton Beach Memoirs, Biloxi Blues, and Broadway Bound, which many consider his finest works. In them, Simon's alter ego, Eugene Morris Jerome, makes his way from childhood to the U.S. Army to finally, on the verge of adulthood, a budding career as a writer. Simon originally started as a radio and TV writer with his older brother, Danny. Yet, Simon grew dissatisfied with television writing and the network restrictions that accompanied it. Out of his frustration came Come Blow Your Horn, which centered on 2 brothers, not unlike Danny and Neil Simon, trying to figure out what to do with their lives. The comedy ran for more than a year on Broadway. But it was his second play, Barefoot in the Park, that really put Simon on the map. Critically well received, the 1963 comedy, directed by Mike Nichols, concerned the tribulations of a pair of newlyweds, played by Elizabeth Ashley and Robert Redford, who lived on the top floor of a New York brownstone. Simon cemented that success 2 years later with The Odd Couple, a comedy about bickering roommates, Oscar, a gruff, slovenly sports writer, and Felix, a neat, fussy photographer. Walter Matthau as Oscar, and Art Carney as Felix, starred on Broadway, with Matthau and Jack Lemmon playing the roles in a successful movie version. Jack Klugman and Tony Randall appeared in the TV series, which ran on ABC from 1970 to 1975. A female stage version was done on Broadway in 1985, and a TV series revival was done in 2015 starring Matthew Perry. Besides Sweet Charity, 1966, which starred Gwen Verdon as a good-hearted dance hall hostess, and Promises, 1968, based on Billy Wilder's film, The Apartment, Simon wrote the books for several other musicals, including Little Me, 1962, featuring a hard-working Sid Caesar in 7 different roles, and They're Playing Our Song, 1979, which had music by Marvin Hamlisch and lyrics by Carol Bear-Sager. Many of his plays were turned into films as well. Besides The Odd Couple, he wrote the screenplays for movie versions of Barefoot in the Park, The Sunshine Boys, The Prisoner of Second Avenue, and more. Simon also wrote original screenplays, the best known being The Goodbye Girl, starring Richard Dreyfuss as a struggling actor, and The Heartbreak Kid, which featured Charles Grodin as a recently married man, lusting to drop his new wife for a blonde goddess played by Sybil Shepherd. Simon was married 5 times, twice to the same woman. He is survived by his 4th wife, actress Elaine Joyce, 2 daughters, Ellen and Nancy, 3 grandchildren, and 1 great-grandson. Simon's death also hit home for actor Matthew Broderick, who made his Broadway debut in Simon's Brighton Beach Memoirs in 1983 and also that year made his movie debut in Simon's Max Duggan Returns. It was my great good fortune that my very first Broadway play was written by Neil Simon. He also wrote my first film. I owe him a career, Broderick wrote. The theater has lost a brilliantly funny, unthinkably wonderful writer, and even after all this time I feel I have lost a mentor, a father figure, a deep influence in my life and work, ____. Follow Mark Kennedy on Twitter at http://twitter.com/KennedyTwits. Copyright 2018 The Associated Press. All rights reserved. This material may not be published, broadcast, written or redistributed. Advertiser content.